Today we're going to be doing a beginner's guide on how to set up your brand new Zippo lighter. Now, interestingly enough, the way that Zippo actually recommends to set up your lighter is not the way that it comes from the factory. So we're going to get that corrected today. Don't need very much. I'm using a set of tweezers, but a little pair of needle nose is fine to use. We're also going to be using premium Zippo lighter fluid and Zippo branded flints. Now, you don't have to use Zippo brand. You can use Roncinol, which is now owned by Zippo. It used to be that the formulas for their lighter fluid were a little bit different. Zippo was definitely the cleaner version, but now they are exactly the same. And the same thing with the flints. The old Roncinol flints used to be more of a reddish color, and now they're using the same exact flints that Zippo uses in the Zippo branded stuff as well. So you can use either or, Roncinol or Zippo. They're exactly the same thing. I'll also give you a couple of tips on how to prolong the life of your consumables as long as possible, just to keep your Zippo running at its optimum for, as long as you possibly can before regular routine maintenance. So let's get started. Now, when you first buy a brand new Zippo, on the bottom side of the case here, the lid, they have the little guarantee pamphlet here. It's going to tell you all about the warranty from Zippo, and basically anything that mechanically goes wrong with your Zippo lighter, they will fix it for free. All that you need to do is pay for the shipping. It's one of the great things about Zippo lighters. Now, what we're going to be doing today is rerouting the wick as shown in this illustration. From the factory, they don't actually route the wick in this configuration. It's actually shoved a little bit more against the top of the case. It's actually better to do it in the orientation that they have shown in the illustration, because it allows the wick to just better absorb the lighter fluid, makes your lighter run just a little bit smoother. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to remove the sticker that comes on the back. And if you pull up from the bottom, if you try to do it from the top, it has the adhesive on there, but they always leave it just without adhesive a little bit here on the bottom, give you a little pull tab to get those off there. So we'll remove that sticker and we'll set that to the side. Now, when we get the lighter opened up, and we'll pull out the insert. This one happens to be a brass insert. Now, with the screw for the spring for the flint, you can use a screwdriver. I've seen people use the lid of their Zippo. I don't really like doing that. I mean, you can, but from the factory they come a little snug. So interestingly enough, this is sized perfectly for a US penny. So I always just use a standard US penny to get that broke free. Now, when we put it back together, we probably won't need anything very strong to get that off there, because it's not necessary to get that spring tightened down quite that tight. So we're going to remove the spring, and then we're going to remove the flint. And now we're going to use our tweezers, or if you have a set of needle nose, you can use that. And we're going to lift up the felt pad, get it out of the way. That way we can get to the rayon balls. Now, this one is set up, they've got this one routed a little bit better than what you find in most, but what we want to do is we just want to get those rayon balls out of here, and there's going to be, should be 5 in a standard Zippo. So we'll remove all of those. You can kind of see how that wick was not really routed the way they had shown it in the illustration, and a couple of those rayon balls were stuck together as well. So there is actually 5 in there. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get this pulled up, and you want to check your wick here. You can ideally leave your wick right below the bottom of the chimney is where we want that to be. Now we're gonna shove one of those rayon balls on either side of the wick before we start rerouting it. When you pack those rayon balls in there tight against either side of the wick, it just alleviates some of the premature evaporation, and just makes your lighter fluid last just a touch longer. It's nothing extraordinarily different, but if you pack it in there pretty tight on those first two, it does help to make your lighter fluid last just a little bit longer. So we're going to get our first 2 rayon balls in there. Make sure that we get those shoved in there nicely, and then we're going to start working this wick back in an S pattern. So we're going to first put it down here, and then we'll set our next rayon ball. In fact, let me get these separated here a little bit better. Now we'll take our next rayon ball and we'll set it over the top of the wick, and then we'll route that wick in the opposite direction. And then we could set our next rayon ball on top of that one. Get it set down, and then finally, one last time, go over it, and we could set our final rayon ball back in. Want to try to push those down as snugly as possible. And that last one is just really, everything's going to flatten out once we get the felt pad back on. So now we can set our felt back in. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to throw a couple extra wicks in here real quick before we ever put lighter fluid in it. I'm going to put an extra 2 wick, or excuse me, I said wicks, I meant flint. Throw a couple extra flints down here. That way they remain with the lighter, and that way whenever your flint goes out, you have one on board, or at least a couple on board to help you out. Now we'll set our flint back in, and then our flint spring and screw. And again, you can just use a standard US penny in order to tighten that back up. I'm just going to snug it. We're not going to tighten it all the way. It doesn't need to be extremely tight. So now that we got that in, we want to make sure that we get everything pushed down so everything is nice and flush, kind of compact those rayon balls in there. And before I set the lighter fluid in there, I like to get this adjusted. So you want to take your wick now and get it straightened back out a little bit. Okay, now we are ready to put it into the case. So I like to take the cam and just open it up here so that we can just set it inside of the case like so. That way if we overfill it just a little bit, all that lighter fluid will go into the case instead of all over your table and just make a mess. So we want to lift up our felt pad here to fill it, and we're going to bring our lighter fluid in. Now you want to fill this about 5 seconds, and then give it time to soak in, and then pour about another 5 seconds. And you can give it just a touch more beyond that if you want, but that should pretty much fill it to the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we'll let that soak down for just a second. And then we'll do it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that should be sufficient to get our lighter going. Now we'll shove that down, and we don't have any extra leakage, so that's good. And we can rotate it, set it back down in the case, bring our cam down, and now we are ready to light the lighter. Now a good safety tip, especially if you overfill it, is just to give it a little bit. You want to take your consumables away now, that way you don't run the risk of starting a fire. If you overfill it a little bit, you're going to get lighter fluid on the outside of your case. It's possible you would get it on your fingers. So it's just best if you just give it a minute, let all the fluid evaporate, just for safety reasons. Now one thing you definitely do not want to do is you do not want to light this when it's out of the case, because if you did have lighter fluid that was on the case, got on your fingers and whatnot, then there's no way to extinguish the flame aside from just blowing it out. And if you catch your case on fire, it's going to be a lot more difficult to put out, where if it's in the case or in the housing, you can very easily shut the lighter off. So just a good safety tip, that it is definitely best to not try to light this when it's outside of the case. Now with the new flint, what I like to do is I'll roll the flint backwards, the flint wheel backwards a couple times, just to kind of form the flint onto the flint wheel. Sometimes it has a tendency to kind of snag at first if you don't. And now we are ready to light it off. Now another thing that we're going to do is I've got, if I can get it here, let me get my little Victorinox knife out. You can take your wick and cut it a little bit lower. I generally like to keep my wick down a little bit lower than flush with the top of the chimney. And I'll show you the difference and why I tend to like it that way. So with just a little pair of Victorinox scissors, I can get in here, cut that wick down just a little bit, and I'll just remove the excess. I've got mine to about the halfway point, and it still worked fine. It just gives you a little bit smaller flame, lets your consumables last just a little bit longer. So I've got a couple extra Zippos here. The first one, the wick is pretty much to the top of the chimney, and in the second one it is about halfway, just like I've got this one set up. So if we light those off, you can see that this one on the right, on the left, is going to give us a little bit taller flame. So it just depends on how you want to set up your flame. If you want a flame that's a little bit taller, then you can leave the wick just a little bit higher. I might have gone just a little bit too low there, but if you do go too low, it's very easy just to grab onto it and pull it up to the desired height, so that mine's sitting now about a 1/4 inch below. So I'm going to get a flame that's right in between those two, which is pretty much perfect for what I want to do. Now, another tip is that the wick is designed not to burn, and the reason that you'll get the wicks will prematurely burn is if you run out of fluid. While you have sufficient amount of fluid in there, the lighter is going to light just fine, and it's not going to burn into your wick. But over time, especially if you run the lighter fluid low in this, then it's going to have a tendency to char over, and it's just going to make your wick, you're just going to use it up a little quicker than what you normally would. So it's always a good idea, especially with Zippos, because they are notoriously bad for running out of fluid prematurely, is to do it on a regular basis. I usually kind of top mine off about once a week, kind of a Sunday ritual where I'll just put 5 seconds worth of fuel in there, or just top it off. It just depends on how much you use your lighter as to how much fluid you need to fill into it. Always a good idea to keep the fluid level, pretty high in it, so that it doesn't prematurely run those wicks down. Now, another way to make sure that your Zippo lasts as long as possible is try not to do tricks with them. So if you do like to do tricks, and the tricks with Zippo lighters are really cool. I actually use my Black Crackle here. It's the one that I'll do tricks with, but the lighter that I'm going to be using, then I will not be doing tricks with it. I'll just use it normal. And the reason for that is because the weak point on a Zippo is going to be the hinge. And over time, you can see how loose my hinge on this one actually is. It's got quite a bit of movement in there. It's also got just a touch of gap in here, because when you're doing tricks, you're really wearing out that hinge point prematurely, and that's going to cause your lighter to lose fluid quite a bit faster. Where on the new Zippo, you can see it is designed to have a little bit of movement, but it is not nearly as bad as what that black one was. So you can see how much movement that black one has. So it's just a good tip to, if you like to do tricks with your Zippo, it's better to have just a cheapo $10 one to do your tricks with, and to one of your more used lighters. Just to try to avoid doing that, because it will make your lighter last a little bit longer. Now, an interesting thing with the wicks on a Zippo lighter is that they are made out of cotton, but they also have a couple of copper strands in here. And the reason that they have that copper in there is because copper is a very, very good conductor of heat. So what will happen is when you light your lighter, those copper strands heat up, and they actually heat up into the body, heat the lighter fluid up below. And it just allows, especially on cooler days or colder days, it allows that lighter fluid to heat up a little bit and gives a little better or more consistent flow for the lighter, and just makes the lighter work a little bit easier. That's the reason why those wicks have copper in them. Now, there are a couple of other options that will, out there in the aftermarket world, that will help to kind of alleviate some of the, maybe not alleviate, but minimize the amount of lighter fluid evaporation that you'll get. The first is that you can replace the felt pad with a rubber insert, and I've actually got some of those on the way. The problem with those is that if you're using your lighter in a situation where you're standing it up and leaving it for a while, it tends to heat up the lighter quite a bit, and that heat will dissipate down and will heat up those pads as well, that rubber, and then they tend to shrink, and then they lose their effectiveness at that point because they're no longer sized correctly to make the proper seal. So that is one issue, or one thing that you can do to kind of help minimize lighter fluid evaporation. Other things that I've seen people do is put them in a little Ziploc bag for lighters that are not getting used all the time, or you can put a Ranger band across it where it would, basically you cut a bicycle inner tube and you're able to make you a wide rubber band that will go around your lighter and help seal up where the two halves meet. And it's not a perfect solution either, but it will help to minimize the amount of lighter fluid evaporation. So those are a couple of tricks. Now you can also change out the insert for a butane insert. There's one in particular on the market called the Vector Thunderbird that I have not had the chance to use personally yet, but I have ordered one and it's on the way, and I'm really interested in that one because that particular one is a soft flame insert, where most butane inserts are going to be a torch style flame. Zippo has a couple, a single and a dual that they have, and then there's several on the aftermarket for Zippo lighter inserts that that are also that torch flame style. I've actually got a few of those on the way to try them out to kind of see how I like them. I think that I personally like just the way the Zippo is now, and if I was gonna change it, it would probably be for that Vector Thunderbird with the soft flame insert as opposed to the torch flame style inserts. So those are a couple of ways that you can try to help alleviate the lighter fluid evaporation that Zippos are kind of known for. But the biggest thing that you can do is the one that you want to use, don't do tricks with it. Keep that hinge, keep those two halves sealed as tightly as possible the way they came out new, and that will definitely help to not eliminate but greatly dissipate the amount of lighter fluid evaporation that you get. If you want to do tricks, I suggest going and getting a cheaper one and do all your tricks with that one. That way you're not ruining the hinge point or the seal on the lighter that you intend to use. This has just been a little bit of a your beginner's guide for your Zippo lighter. Hope this helps. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.